You may want page 616 and 17 open, Isaiah 56 and 57. Thank you. I'm just going to read to you that last sentence again. But he who takes refuge in me shall possess the land and shall inherit my holy mountain. Well, as Ben's already made reference, it's that time of year where students move from city to city, and in this case, there's a church crawl where they try out a couple of churches as they work out where they're going to go to church. So we hope you find a home and choose wisely as you do so. And it's also a couple of strange thoughts came into my head. One of them was how many students are here. So I've spoken at ALU CU a few times over the years, and I've been spoken to a CU of 2 people and 5 people. So it's encouraging to see a whole load of you here today. It's also strange that there's a number of people at CPC away. If everyone was here that was here the last 2 weeks, we wouldn't have got you all in. So I don't know whether people have been arranging that before they got here, but do stick around for lunch. So I wonder, though, as this sort of thing happens, when someone moves town, they check out maybe a couple of churches as they work out where they're going to settle. Now, I wonder if we could do a tour of not Chelmsford churches, but of the New Testament churches, or the Old Testament church at different times, like this time we're looking at in Isaiah, different eras. Would you choose any of those churches? Would you really want to go to the Corinthian church or the church of Isaiah's day? When we read about them, they're all real. They really are God's people. They're a church, but they have significant problems. And so when we see problems in the modern church, and of which there are many, we're not an outlier. Like, this is what God's people are like. They're normally a bit of a mess. So there are certain dangers that God's people have. They've always been there. And even when the church looks okay on the surface, we often find that the problems are a bit deeper. So this bit of Isaiah looks at how we can be as God's people, but also what we should be as his distinct people, and also how God will get us there. Now, last week we did a bit of a recap, and for those of you who've not been here before for a long time, what we've been doing is looking at chunks of Isaiah in this term over the last few years, and it nicely tees up Advent and Christmas for us. Why did it? And it was a long time ago we started. So this is a sort of recap that we looked at recently. You can think of Isaiah in 3 big chunks. There's little chunks within it, but some big chunks. And each chunk, Isaiah is speaking as a pastor for his first readers. So he says something pastorally comforting or challenging, but also points ahead to the promised Christ. And when you take those things together, that's why it's used so much in the New Testament. It's very significant for us. So 1 to 39 happens in Isaiah's life. It's a time of a threat from Assyria in the north to Israel. The worship in Israel looked pretty good. They were doing it right, but their hearts were distant from God. Now, at the time Isaiah's writing, Israel has already split into 2 countries. There's Israel in the north and Judah in the south. And what happens in this part of Isaiah is the northern kingdom, Israel, comes to an end. It doesn't exist anymore. And Jerusalem and Judah are saved by God from the Assyrian threat. And what we learn is that this Christ will come who will be God with us. He will be Emmanuel. And 40 to 55 is in Isaiah's near future, but obviously past to us. And Judah has learnt nothing from what happened to Israel, and they end up being taken as punishment to Babylon as exiles. But God gives them a hope that they will return. And there we meet Christ as the suffering servant who takes away our sin. And that section ends with an invitation. All nations, come, feed and drink. And this last section, we're heading towards Christmas now, is 56 to 66, is he looks to the future, his far future and our future, where God will abolish death and renew all of creation, and the world will be healed. And Christ there we meet as the returning, conquering king. And so chapter 55 is this invitation to all come. And then 56, 1 to 8 we looked at, is who are those who are coming? And those who are invited are particularly the outsider, the sinner, the outcast, the downtrodden. Those you'd expect to be on the outside of the church are told, come in and eat. And as we head to the new creation and this new life given from the servant and defended by the conquering king, we then come to a surprise. 56 verse 9 is like a body blow. The church is in a serious problem. And it's a surprise given what we've had, that what God is recreating the world into, what the church is, and what his people are. And so, but also it is a passage of hope, to make us think that salvation is bigger than we think. Salvation is not just going to heaven when you die, but it's a bigger thing, and we need a bigger picture of God and his works and what Christ will do for us. And what we need to do that is we need to have what they call in the Bible the fear of the Lord. So we're going to look at the leaders and the people and God, the failed leaders, the wayward people, and a gracious God. So first is the failed leaders in that first bit, chapter 56, verses 9 to 12. And verse 9 is like, given what we've had the last couple of chapters in Isaiah, verse 9 comes like screeching brakes. If you've been watching the rugby, it's like a Fijian rugby tackle to the chest, is what this is like. 2 chapters of comfort and security in God, and suddenly danger. The danger is the flock, God's flock, are about to be attacked in verse 9, and they are ready to be served up to the forest animals. Why? Because the church leaders are not doing their job. They're not being shepherds. And there's a repeated idea in these verses. It is that it says a couple of times they have no knowledge or no understanding. They don't know what they're doing or why. They're not protecting the flock by keeping a lookout in verse 10. So shepherds are meant to spot danger and keep it away, and so the sheep are safe. And so Isaiah calls them, as watchmen, they are blind. As watchdogs or sheepdogs, they don't bark. They're useless. They lie by the fire, comfortable. My dad used to do insurance claims, and he was about dogs. They're very good for security, but some dogs, they go in and find the whole house empty because of a burglar, just a dog there gnawing a bone. That's what these dogs are like. They're useless as watchdogs. In the church, the shepherd and pastors are drive away spiritual danger. And of course, that's awkward because we want to just sit by the fire. I don't like to say awkward things. Rather, verse 11, the dogs that are hungry and they're never satisfied, and so they feed themselves and not feed the flock. That's the other thing a shepherd does. They protect and they feed, but these just feed themselves. And they are, verse 12, drunk, indulgent, and complacent. They sit back, there's no danger, we're all comfortable, it's fine. Now, in Isaiah, time of Isaiah, the political leadership and church leadership is the same thing. We live in a different time. So we may see things in Isaiah that we may think reflects on our ruling classes, and we'll have our own opinions about that. But the shock here is that these are the pastors and elders of the church that he's speaking about. There's a lack of fear of God. And Isaiah's been talking about that all the way through his book, is the fear of the Lord. There's a lack of a fear of God is a lack of reality. We need a dose of reality. And we've seen too much of this in recent years in different ways, that church leaders are not looking out for the threats that are coming to the church, that they're not preparing and teaching and readying the church for what we face inside and outside of the church, and feeding themselves and complacent. And there's a contrast here with a good shepherd and the good shepherd. And the good shepherd is also the suffering servant of Isaiah. He did not care for himself, but he died for his sheep. If you remember, this appears in all the Gospels, is Jesus feeding the 5,000. And why does he do it? It says he sees the people as lost as sheep without a shepherd. So in the build-up to that in all the Gospels, the religious leaders, hopeless. The king, hopeless. And Jesus pulls up in a boat and he sees on the green grass, everyone would be wearing white then, like all these people went right coming down the hill, looking a bit like sheep. And he says they're sheep who are not fed. They're sheep without a shepherd. And what's the first thing he does once he identifies them as that? He taught them. So he feeds them. He literally feeds them in the end. But he feeds them initially with his word. The good shepherd feeds the sheep. He feeds them with spiritual food before he gives them their physical food. And in the New Testament, these pastors are called under-shepherds. The Lord is the shepherd, and he has these people he hires to work with him. But they're meant to be like him. They follow his pattern. So in Isaiah terms, they're like the suffering servant. God's servant suffers and is willing to suffer, to put the sheep before their own personal comfort. So this is a striking message for those of us who are shepherds, pastors, elders, those involved with teaching and caring for our young people. And for all of you, this shows you what you're looking for. That you need to understand our job, pray for us, that's nice, but also to make sure we do it, to hold us to account that we do it. Now, how does this affect the people? Well, that's the next thing we see is there's a wayward people in verses 1 to 11 of the next chapter. So there's a contrast here between the faithful and the faithless. We're going to focus on the faithless, but just for a second, the faithful in verses 1 to 2, which we will come back to. But notice that being faithful is not the easy option in verse 1. The righteous man perishes, and no one lays it to heart. Devout men are taken away, while no one understands, for the righteous man is taken away from calamity. So, same as the leaders, there's a problem because their default is comfort, and to be wayward is easier than to be faithful. And Isaiah here uses shocking language. The Bible's not very PC. He uses shocking language. And he refers to the church as children of sorcerers and adulterers and loose women. The Hebrew is slightly less polite. It says prostitute. So as we go through, and there's a lot to say here, we won't go through every verse, but it talks about a lot that's wrong in the church. But there's a common feature, and that is what Israel has done, or Judah has done, is set up an alternative religion, an alternative God of their own mind. And it's a theme that keeps on coming up since the very start of Isaiah, is that you can have a religion, you can have a worship service that looks good and about right. And I guess we've all got different ideas and different backgrounds as to what we think that is. That's not the point. The point is that you can do something that we think is the right thing, but our heart is far from God. And so look at the themes of a compromised church. It's mocking and has deceit, verse 4. So that's not to say there's no humour. Humour is not a bad thing. You will find humour in the Bible. But there's a mocking tone of the things of God. And so it actually says sticking their tongue out. And it's deceitful. The church is not being 100% honest in how it's dealing with one another and others. Lust and infanticide in verse 5. So it talks about sexual desire and giving in to sexual desire and the killing of infants. And they link it here, as it often does in the Bible. These are age-old problems. That's what we could say about it. But the point here is that the church is to be marked out as different from the surrounding areas. There's a replacement God and religion in verses 6 to 8. And what's interesting here is he uses worship language, like the drink offering and the grain offering of the high places and the memorials and about them making a covenant. So it looks like how religion should be in the Old Testament, but it's not. He says, verse 8, you were deserting me. They're going through the motions, but they're deserting the Lord. They've got an alternative God, alternative religion, with outward appearances of true religion, and it leads to a false sense of security. They think they're strong, but they're not. In verses 9 and 10. Verse 10, you were wearied with the length of your way, but you did not say it's hopeless. You found new life in your strength, and you were not faint. So they feel that their actions are strengthening themselves. Their fake religion and their pretend God makes them feel better about life, but it's not real. And they're doing all these things, all fit into the place that should be God's place. And it's just all a bit less awkward, isn't it, if we do that? God's just a bit awkward at times, isn't he? What he asks of us. as we've seen in recent weeks, that following the real God and doing things his way will lead to you sticking out and being a bit weird. But what's really shocking here is not Isaiah's robust language, not just his description of society, but this is a description of the people of God, the church. Now, think back to the section about leaders. They were just following their leaders. It's why leadership matters. And what's happened here is that they're not distinct from their culture. They're just not willing to be weird. Now, how did it go so wrong for them? Well, that's in verse 11. Whom did you dread and fear, so that you lied, and did not remember me, did not lay it to heart? Have I not held my peace, even for a long time, that you did not fear me? Their fear is misplaced, and that's the root issue that's causing all the problems. Now, remember, people have been at CPC for a while, remember the two most common commands in the Bible. Anyone know number one? What was it? I'm a bit deaf to it. I didn't hear that. So what did you say? Do not be afraid is number one. Yeah, absolutely. The number one command is do not fear. Number two, remember. Yeah, so the two most common commands in that order, do not fear, remember. And in verse 11, they're tied. Verse 11, they feared the wrong thing. They should fear God. And they don't fear God because they've not remembered the Lord. So to remember the Lord is to fear him. And to fear him is to fear nothing else. Either we fear the Lord mixed with joy and confidence, or we don't fear him and we fear lots and lots of other things. And the problem with modern Christianity, and perhaps even more than evangelical Christianity that we're in, is God is my mate. He's my chum. Not the Holy One to be feared. We've got to have two truths in our head at the same time. Fear the Holy One and approach with confidence. It's the same person, it's the same God, but we have two attitudes at the same time. Confidence in him, he wants us to come, and he loves us, and we are his friend, and to fear him. And that's why Isaiah keeps driving this home. You need a bigger vision of God. Whatever view you have of God, it is too small. And so worship in Isaiah is not religitainment. We've all got our ideas of, it's funny when people come from different cultures, and if they're even Presbyterian from a different culture, and you say, oh, is this like your church at home? They say, no, you sang too much, you didn't sing enough, the readings were too short, too long. We've all got our own ideas. The point in Isaiah is that you worship in awe with fear. And fear drives out all other fears. Worship is not meant to be comfortable. It's the awareness of being in the presence of the holy Creator God. And we do this as sinners. And like Isaiah, we expose ourselves as undone, but that leads to the greatest comfort of all. So what's God's take on this? Well, we meet God here as the gracious God in verses 12 and 13. And there's a contrast here of what God accepts and doesn't. It's very clear through the passage what he doesn't accept and the consequences of that, and that being idolatry. So what much of Isaiah has challenged, and it's a shock that it comes up in this bit, is that even the renewed people of God still fall for these things. It pops up in superficiality and sort of correct-looking worship, but you scratch below it and there's nothing there. Verse 13, beginning of verse 13, when you cry out, let your collection of idols deliver you. The wind will carry them all off. You see, he's saying, let your idols help you. You've got these alternatives to gods. Go to them for help. See how that does. If you take a fake comfort and opt for something over God, you find that it fails you. But another aspect of idolatry and fake worship is in verse 12. I will declare your righteousness and your deeds, but they will not profit you. Salvation by works. We have seen injustice and immorality and idolatry as a problem. All this leads to rejection of God. But although the Bible from start to end warns against this, many conclude that the Bible teaches us to be nice. And that's all. It's like this cartoon I came across the other day, you may have seen another cartoon of someone typing on the internet and said, there's someone on the internet who's wrong. It's just the norm, isn't it? But this is the idea in this cartoon is there's an old piece of art about hell, and the devils are like prison wardens, and the caption says, if you need the threat of hell to be a good person, then you're just a bad person on a leash. So the idea that people have, and you find in this cartoon and other places, is that bad people go to hell, good people go to heaven. And the objection to that is if you need hell to be good, then you're the bad person. And interestingly, this was posted by a minister. Now, if this is what you think, I'm about to make you squirm and be uncomfortable for a few moments, but you'll thank me. If you think this is the point of what a lot of the Bible teaches, you've misunderstood Christianity wholesale. Not an aspect or something that weird Presbyterians believe. You've misunderstood the whole thing about what God is about. If you think this is how it works, then you're thinking that you are a good person, you are self-justified, and you've set the bar really low. And this problem that's repeatedly mentioned in the Bible is that we are all sinners. We're all in the same boat. Some people have symptoms that are worse, and that is significant. But then, to offer God our good works by themselves as if that's going to work is just delusional, and perhaps a worse offence than all the other things Isaiah talks about. As it's put in the New Testament, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us if we do that. So what is acceptable to God then? And this is really good news. End of verse 13, sentence I started with. But he who takes refuge in me shall possess the land and shall inherit my holy mountain. We've already seen this in Isaiah. God invites sinners and outsiders to come. And he makes that possible through the suffering servant. Now, if you think you're okay, that you're good enough for God, you are in serious trouble. But if you think you're ruined and there's no hope, there's very good news for you. Verse 1 and 2, we saw that it is harder to be righteous, and often there's suffering to be righteous, but God brings them peace. If we take refuge in him, we see his holy mountain. We come to his eternal dwelling. And this is what we call justification by faith. The Bible is a big book, but it doesn't say lots of things. It says a few things lots of times, and this is one of the big ones. Justification by faith alone. That means to be put right with God, to be on friendly terms with God by faith, by embracing the offer that he makes to us in Christ. And so Isaiah 57:13, take refuge in him. In fact, the next verse goes on about don't put anything in anyone's way as they do that. Take refuge in him means to be put right with God, not by making it up to him by your good works. That would be like dealing with an amputation by giving someone a Band-Aid, but by acknowledging our sin. And it's not just a Reformation idea, it's not just a New Testament idea, it's there from page 1 in the Bible all the way through. Now, the Reformation really discovered this again in a big way, but also the Reformation was talking about reforming our worship. And here's a distinct note that Isaiah adds to justification by faith. Justification by faith and right worship are linked here, and right behaviour. The problem is no fear of God leads to immorality and fake worship. Morality is just how we worship God with our whole life outside of church. If we take God casually, then this is what happens. Fake worship, immorality. The solution is fear God. And if we fear God, if we know who we're dealing with, we know the only thing that will work is justification by faith and to live for him. Isaiah keeps wanting to show us the bigness of God, his power, his wisdom, his eternity, his infiniteness, his grace and his love. And as Christians, we know that he is Emmanuel, he's God with us, that he is the suffering servant who died for us, that he is the conquering king who wins and is returning. And so we see him as he is and we worship him. And so as we do so, we see he is the only hope. Take refuge in him. And that motivates our living for him. Justification is by faith alone. It is by faith alone, but that faith is never alone. Salvation is not just a get out of jail free card. Justification is apart from our good works, but it ends in good works. So Ephesians 2:8-10 talks about you are saved by grace, and this is a gift, and it's a loan, and emphatically adds not by works, just to make sure we've got that, and then says to do good works. Faith is the root, works is the fruit. And that's liberating, isn't it? And motivating. I don't want to please God because, what's going to happen otherwise? He's already pleased with me. I want to please him because of gratitude and because of love. As someone said before, if you wake up in the morning and you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, how does God feel about me today? If the answer is not, he is delighted in me, you've not understood the gospel. When we try to come to God by our own works, we get nowhere. The good works themselves fail, even if we could get them right. When we take his gift, a godly lifestyle follows. And the rest of Isaiah is about the bigness of God and the smallness of us. And we see, when we worship him right and refuge in him, it's the same thing, we can look to a new creation. Isaiah here warns the church leaders and the church about the leaders. Hold us to account that we are protecting and feeding the flock. And he warns the church, even in the age of the Spirit, that they wander due to a lack of seeing who God really is. But he is gracious, and his failed, wayward people can still take refuge in him and then stay in that safe place. So if you've not done that before, come to that safe place, that good. If you think that you are the safe place and that you are a good person, you're in great danger. Come to Christ. He is the safe place. Come to Christ, eat, drink, be satisfied, and be safe. Let's pray.